Hi there, this is Dave Hawes from Powder Software. In this video, I'm going to go over the installation of Chartnado and the creation of a very simple dashboard using an Excel file. So if you have not already installed Chartnado, head on down to the Apps menu and search for the Chartnado application. So once we start the installation of the Chartnado application, there are two places you can put it. The first is to put it into a personal tab, and the other one is to put it into a team. But we're going to start with adding it to the personal tab so that we can create a dashboard, and then we'll add it to a team later. So we'll click Add. And the first thing that happens is you will be presented with a dialog asking you to log in. The reason that we do that is because we need to save and load files from a file system, and the two possibilities are loading and saving files from the SharePoint OneDrive file system or loading and saving files from the Google Workspace and or Google Drive. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to do a demonstration of the Microsoft OneDrive / SharePoint file system. And in order to illustrate that really quickly, I'm going to actually jump over to Office and I'm going to light up SharePoint. Now, every time you create a team in Teams, that creates a SharePoint site. And so we've created a sample team that the demo user that we're using has access to. So the sample team is where we're going to actually store our files. So if you look at the document library for the sample team, under the general folder, there's a demo Excel file. This is also where we are going to store the actual Chartnado dashboard file itself. So keep that in mind as we go through the demonstration. Now, first thing we'll do is we'll log in with our credentials. And so basically you just log in with your standard Office login. And the first time you log in, we do have to ask you for some permissions, mostly so that we can read and write the SharePoint OneDrive file system. And that's all we're doing, so that we can load and save files from OneDrive. So if we accept that, then you are presented with an initial file chooser to say, okay, where do you want to create the new dashboard? So the first thing we'll do is we'll go into Sample Team, Documents Library, like we just saw under General. You'll notice that this is our demo XLSX file that we're going to use for our data. So we'll go in and we'll say, okay, we want to create a new dashboard, and we'll just call this demo because I'm very unimaginative. So we'll save that. So we'll click the demo.chart file, and this will get us into the dashboard designer. Now, basically, this is going to be a very simple demonstration just to get you started. But the basic idea is this. A dashboard consists of multiple worksheets. Now, we don't have any worksheets yet. You can create as many as you want. It's kind of like an Excel file where it can have as many worksheets as you feel like. So the first thing that we're going to do is you can either add a worksheet down here, or you can unlock the whole thing so that basically the edit system shows up and you can now add a worksheet. So our worksheet is called Sample Worksheet. We'll go into that. And this is our worksheet designer. So basically for the worksheets, what you do is you drag various widgets onto the worksheets. The most important worksheet is the cross table widget. This is where we define charts and maps and gauges and all that sort of stuff. You can also drag text widgets and HTML widgets and shape widgets on, and there's going to be more widgets as we go along. But the big one is the cross table. So we'll drag a cross table on. We'll make it a little bigger just to show you the effect of this. And then highlight it. And so what we'll do is we'll go over and edit this widget now. Now, this is our cross table designer. This is where we design the actual chart or gauge or whatever it is that you want to show. But before we do that, we have to provide some data. Now, in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to provide data from an Excel file. So I'm going to bounce back over to the SharePoint system for just a second, and we're going to have a look at the actual Excel file itself. This Excel file is very simple. It's only got one worksheet in it, and that one worksheet has a table of data in it. There is one prerequisite when working with Excel files in Chartnado, and that is any data that you want to use from an Excel file has to be in a data table. And the reason that we do that is so that we know that, for example, all of the data in a particular column has the same data type, and columns have column names. That's why we require that. So basically you can see that there's one table in this worksheet, and if you go up to table design, you'll notice that the table is named sales. So keep that in mind when you're designing your Chartnado data dashboards. So we'll switch back over to Chartnado, and we're going to go and provide some data for this particular cross table. So we'll go into the table, and this is where you're dropped into our functional expression builder, or basically this is our diagram builder for how everything is presented to the system with functions. Now, to give you an example of that, we know that the data that we want to get comes from an Excel file, and that Excel file is stored in OneDrive. So we'll start with a OneDrive file, and we'll drag a OneDrive file from over there onto the canvas. Now, the OneDrive file has properties, so the only property for the OneDrive file that we really need is its name. So we'll go over to the properties pane, and we'll select the name of the OneDrive file from the properties pane. You'll notice that this is the same chooser that we showed you when we originally installed Chartnado. So we'll go into sample team, the documents directory, under the general folder, and the data comes from the demo.xlsx file. Now, just supplying the OneDrive file isn't enough. What we need is data from an Excel table, and an Excel table can only come from a OneDrive file. At least in the Microsoft file system. So we say we want a Microsoft Excel table. So we drag an Excel table and drop it on the OneDrive node so that the table comes from the OneDrive file, but we still have to name the table. So we say, go over to the properties pane again. We say table name. Now, this is, remember, everything comes from functions. And so the first thing that we do is we drag a text function on so that we can just type in some text, and we give this a name called sales. So we go back to the function builder, and you'll notice that we've now supplied the OneDrive file, we've supplied the table name, and if you click the Excel table, you'll notice that all of the data that's in that Excel table from that file shows up in the inspector. So the one thing that we don't want to do is query the OneDrive system every time we do any kind of change to the dashboard, so we'll wrap this in a cache node so that we only query it once and then cache it on the client side. So we drop that on there, and now we've cached the data that comes from this file, this table. It's the same data. So we'll save our dashboard file so far, just to make sure we don't lose any changes. Now that is the definition of where the table data comes from. Now this is an expression builder, and so you could say that, for example, the data comes from SQL Server, or if it's Tuesday, it comes from Excel files, and if it's Thursday, it comes from SQL Server, or whatever. You can build up any function you like in here using these graphical building blocks, and we'll do a bit more of that as we go along. So we'll go back to the cross table designer. Now, we haven't designed the actual cross table yet. All we've done is defined where the table for the where the data for the cross table comes from. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, what I want to do is I want to get a bar chart of the sales per country. So I'm going to drag down country to arguments, and then what's going to do is it's going to create a group for every country of data in the original table. So it's kind of like, if we go back to the Excel file, if you were to filter the country, if we were to put a filter on here and say that we want to put in the text filter of Canada, let's say, click OK, then all of the data in this table that is for Canada only has now been grouped in Chartnado like that. So if you go into here, you can actually see that. We'll go into the value of the marker. You'll notice it's an auto group by country, and again, you're dumped into the formula builder. So what we take is the current group field, which was country, so because we're grouping on country. Then we take we get the data table that is originally going to be grouped up, and then we group it by that field. So basically what happens is for every unique value of country, we get another data table. So basically what this is saying is all of the rows for Australia are in here. And if you were to use our inspector, you can go and see that the country is nothing but Australia. So if you go back, you can see that this one, the country, the data table is nothing but Canada. Now that's an important point that we have to keep in mind, is that what we've done is, if we go back to the designer, what we've built is groups of data, one group for each country. And the overlying or overarching principle of Chartnado is that what we do is we build these groups, and then you can do with a group whatever you like. So let's say what we want to do is we want to have a summary of the sales for each country. So then what we would do is line total is where the sales are. So we drag line total down to values, and we get a bar chart, and we'll get one marker for each country because there were 6 groups. So how does that work? Well, remember that country, what we did was we grouped things based on the field of country. So we got one group for each value of country. Now, if you were to look at this data table itself for just Australia, we can do more interesting things with Australia. For example, we can say, okay, what we want to do is we want to take the line total column and we just want to sum it all up. That's what we've done by dragging the summary or line total to the values column. That's what you get out of the gate. So if we go over to line total, into the value, you can see the sum of line total. Now, it's important to understand that the sum of line total only applies to the group in question. So what we do is we take the current value field, which is line total. We take the current group data table, which is whatever data table was that we had originally grouped. So this refers to the Australia data table. And then what we do is we take a summary of the line total column, and we do that for every group. So basically what happens is for Australia it looks like 2, 4, 6, 8, so that's 100,000. So Australia is roughly 30,000 ish. Canada is roughly 21,000 ish, or 200,000 ish, 210 maybe. And that's how you create widgets using data in the basic system. Now, this gets really interesting when you start to drag things like columns to rows and columns, because then you can create small multiples of this, and I can show you that really quickly because we can change this visual. Instead of a chart, what we'll do is we'll change this to a pivot grid. So you'll notice that now, instead of showing it to you as a bar chart, we show it to you as a pivot grid. And, oops, I didn't want to do that. At the moment, all we're doing is we're showing you the numbers of line total per country, and there are no countries past, there are no fields past country. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, now what we want to do is we want to take another subgroup and drag that down. We'll call sales territory. And now what we're doing is we're summing the numbers for country, and then we're summing the numbers for sales territory. But then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we want to do the same thing, but we want a column for each product category. So we'll do that, and now we get the products for each category, and then we'll do product subcategory. And we get a pivot table for all of the line totals for all of the categories and subcategories and all of that. Now, you could actually turn this into a chart if you want to. If you were to go back and change this back to a chart, now that chart would be a little hard to read because of the sheer number of bars and lines and all of that sort of stuff. So what we'll do is we'll simplify this again a little bit. What we'll do is we'll say we'll take country out, or sorry, we'll take sales territory out. We'll take product subcategory out, so that now what we'll do is for each country, for each product category, we'll make a bar chart. So we go back to the visual, change this back to a chart, and you can see that for Australia, for accessories, for France for accessories, and you'll notice that we get one complete chart for each category. So we get a chart for accessories, we get a chart for bikes, we get a chart for clothing, etc., etc., etc. So that's how Chartnado works. So basically the idea is that we group things by product category first. So you go into product category and you can see that we group things by product category. So we get a group for accessories, bikes, clothing, and components. And then for arguments, we group things again. So we get one group for each country. And then what we do is for the chart of accessories Australia, we take the union of the product category of accessories and the country of Australia, and we take that data and we sum up the line total. So whatever the group data table is for accessories and Australia, we take the summary of the line total column. And we now have the basic of a tiny little dashboard. Now we're going to take product category back out again to just make the chart a little easier to see. And so we'll go back to the template. We'll save this. And now we have our chart. And so you can start putting additional widgets on. You can start connecting the widgets to each other using events so that there's interaction between the two of them. That's a subsequent video. We'll get to that in a bit. But that's the basic idea of how you get data into a Chartnado dashboard using an Excel file. And so hopefully that gets people started. And in subsequent videos, we'll show you how to do the rest of the operations that can happen in Chartnado, of which there are many. And so hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much.